Hello and welcome to Mindscapes, our series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is a unique artist. He's blended materials, techniques and the possibilities of new media and technology. He's both an academic, a practicing artist of considerable, enormous distinction, whose work has been displayed in the capitals of the world. He's an associate professor of art at the School of the Arts at the Jamia Millia University, but most recently has been in the news as the newly appointed head of the National Gallery of Modern Art. I'm delighted to welcome Rajeev Lochan. Rajeev,
Hi.
welcome. What does it take for an artist to become a virtually full-time administrator, looking after what has traditionally been believed to be quite a mess?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think artists manage their own creative endeavors quite well. Mm-hmm. So I see it no other than that. Mm-hmm. I also see it as being the other side of the fence. Mm-hmm. Last 2 decades, being involved with academics and art practice, and conceptualizing things and theoretizing things in an academic fashion. It's
really sort of there are these three facets to your work, and you know, as an academic, you have formally studied art at Baroda, and you have taught it, and you've inspired generations of students. We've been colleagues in teaching art. You've taught art to students of mass communication. You have been a painter of considerable distinction, not just a painter, but you have worked with photography. You have combined media, and now we find that you accepted an enormous administrative responsibility, and this is sort of seems an unusual mix for a talented, sensitive, established artist, and hence the question.
Yeah, no, I quite understand what you mean to say. The way I'd like to address it as, you see, being in academics, I was all the time talking about the basic evolution and the ethos that contemporary art envisages for itself. But this was always limited to academic practice and conceptualization of philosophical nature. Now is the time to actually see it through. So I see it almost as an extension of what I have been doing with some so-called mundane administrative duties. But then that's all part of the game. And I have another analogy to that, in the sense that, well, artists manage their own paintings quite well, envisage, hypothesize, and then ensure that the hypothesis comes through. I have this favorite statement of mine that I'd like to share with you, I think, which addresses many such questions. Fantasy is the basis of all hypotheses, as much applicable to science as it is to art, because creativity is the common denominator. Well, you see, administration can sometimes also be creatively handled. And
what are some of the challenges that you're facing immediately, and what are your priorities? I mean, I hate to sort of go on this route of your role as administrator, but only it's because it's the most recent. I still don't see you as one, and maybe it'll take some time. But you know, the National Gallery of Modern Art has been neglected. It's been at the center of many controversies. The annual ritual of which paintings or which works of art it's going to buy, the preservation of old material, restoration. These are ongoing issues. And I think that the wheels of change move slowly sometimes. So what priorities do you see? What sort of administrative techniques do you feel that you're going to bring to this sort of sort of hobbling institution in a way?
Well, to tell you the truth, it's my 38th day today. And it's not because I remember it to be 38, that's what my office tells me.
As a compliment or as fear?
Well, I wouldn't like to say that as a compliment, but the way they say it, it appears to be a compliment.
Well, you mean you've survived that long, or you've done so much?
No, what I mean to say is I've been with them. I think there's not an area that I have not entered, talked to them. I think I'm speaking to almost 8 to 10 of my people, trying to understand their issues and motivate them. I think motivation is the core. I'm trying to make them understand that you are part of a very prestigious national institution, and what is it worth? What should it look forward to? What should be the documentation processes be like? How should it be done? What's the kind of technology that we need? What do we have? Where are we? So these three questions that I've raised to myself, which I'm trying to raise to them. Who am I? And what is it that I wish to share? And then comes, how do I share it? So, I mean, it's only an extension of this, this basic ethos that's part of my own work that I have adapted here, because I had no time to envisage and plan how to go about things except to deal with them.
How does it feel to walk into an institution where your own painting is up and to now manage it?
Well, the first thing I did was, and which they were quite surprised, they thought that the National Gallery of Modern Art director would come in and say, hang 5 more of mine. And I said, well, the first thing that you do is bring my work down, because this space now belongs to someone else. It belongs to the art world. And I also want to say it as, I was responsible for my own creative endeavors until the time I joined. But now I'm responsible to art. And I think that's, I take pride in saying that.
Well, I think there's art and there are artists, and it's perhaps easier to be responsible for art than it is to be responsible for the artists who are going to respond in one way or another to the kind of decisions you take, the choices that you make. And the artistic community doesn't have a great reputation for, shall we say, acknowledging, appreciating, and applauding each other. It is inherently competitive, and particularly in the increasingly visible commercialization of art. Your choices are going to have enormous implications.
Yes.
How do you visualize this aspect, this relationship with your colleagues unfolding?
Well, to tell you the truth, I envisage National Gallery to be an institution that not only takes care of or addresses the issues that have contributed to the evolution of contemporary art, but also issues that younger people like us are in the process of addressing. And if these issues with my own artist friends can be sorted out, identified, and prioritized, I think many of such issues. I mean, what I'm trying to say is, I don't think that working in an ad hoc fashion is the real answer to issues. I think this prioritization of issues and looking at it in a much more holistic fashion is what needs to be done.
So what are some of the issues that you feel you must prioritize?
First thing, documentation and research. National Gallery of Modern Art, well, I can only initiate this process, it's long, should be in a position to answer any kind of a query about any artist who practices in this country. In fact, ideally speaking, you should be able to log on and access this, because this is the information that is meant to be disseminated. So I don't see National Gallery as a warehouse. And I want to make this very clear, that it's not a buying house. It's a house that is going to preserve the best. And you're going to decide what is the best. And I have a very, in a joke I always say this, contemporary is most temporary, only time shall tell. So let's see what time has already shared with us and what time shall tell us what really is worth going there.
So what are the processes of arriving at what is best? In some ways, part of it is obviously picking up or responding to what is established as being the best through consensus. But the challenge really is anticipating what is likely to be regarded
Yes, yes.
as,
Envisaging.
as quality.
Yes.
And I think that your
Be
own
eclectic.
work, your own work has
Yeah.
had the quality of innovation and moving forward quite aggressively in a sense.
Well, let me say it like this. All practicing artists have transformed their inner intuitive sense that intuitively tells them, irrespective of the fact that they may acknowledge it or not, what is best and what is not and what has the potential. So I think that's what needs to be tapped. And this can be...
Yes, and yet in some ways that also needs to be articulated.
It needs to be articulated and not just left at that. I mean, often people say, oh, I mean, artists, who are kind of loners, and I think artists are the most normal, rational human beings. I mean, I beg to differ. Very sharp, acute in their, and they have a very discerning eye.
But artists are believed to be to sort of have a sensibility that is more sensitive, an ability to experience more, for some reason, anguish and pain rather than joy, as being nurturing of the creative temperament. Do you feel that's true?
Well, true, yes and no, both. I think all these things add on to the creative process, and well, it differs from individual temperament.
What has been a greater context of learning for you, sort of joy or pain? Don't say both.
Well, to tell you the truth, pain. To tell you the truth, pain. I think I'd like to address it like this, that all of us, what are we trying to do? We're all trying to find our silence. And interestingly, we have to find our silence within this chaos. So it's truly speaking, for the pleasurable part of the pain. So, so that's the reason, that's how it gets interconnected. So pain doesn't remain pain at all.
Much of your work, the earlier work seems to have excluded the human form, and it's something that's come into this recently. So when you look at this aspect of pleasure and pain, normally, ordinarily, other than the fact that it's the middle of Delhi summer as we record this and we experience physical pain, or if you're in situations of crisis, earthquake, floods, the nuclear explosion, it's usually sort of our sense of ongoing pain is with sort of human contact in that sense. And you have talked about this relationship between human beings. Why this exclusion? What was the state of mind that was influencing this?
Well, it was a very conscious one, let me tell you. I was all the while trying to look for this lurking human presence of man rather than his physical existence. And therefore, in spite of the fact that I was involved with the human spirit of things, the physicality, in physicality, the man never existed there. Well, I'll go back to the series that I have conceived, because it's a thought process.
Sure.
It's a continuous thought process that transforms into an image. And you see, I started with the series titled as Vision in Illusion. Well, I was young, I was at college, that was my first series, and that was my state as all young people, trying to look for their own individual ethos, which transformed into a series titled as Anticipation. So it's another process of inner search, which transformed into another series titled as Introspective Anticipation. So another one called Within and Beyond. So it's the indulgence of the self in the larger context. To become another series titled as Doors of Perception. To transform itself into the vision of reality and wanting to look at the other side of it, the latest one as the reality of the vision. So it's only when the reality of the vision comes in that the human being walks in. Otherwise, his existence was, to tell you the truth, never actually needed.
In some ways, the progression that you talk about is something that an artist goes through, sort of, the stages of his evolution and learning. But it's also, and you're an academic too, not just painter, it's also possible to predict these processes in some ways.
Yes.
So what does a painter who's an academic do, in a sense that, are you almost able to predict your own unfolding when you relate this to the unfolding of so many artists and works that you study? To what extent does it remain spontaneous, and to what degree is all the studies and everything that you accumulate and assimilate?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. You see, a lot of artists arrive at the image. In my case, I start from the arrived image, and that's the reason why the photographic intervention, which I'd actually been involved with last 2 decades, became so important for me. You see, photography has this great innate capacity to be able to document moments that are pregnant with surprises and that slip into oblivion. You see, the moment you move out from that place. So I use photography as a tool to document that moment. And
I should really explain that much of your recent work really is photographs that you then sort of paint over and develop and add value
and
eliminate
yes, absolutely
to it.
Yeah. So I let that image brew, and you see, the process of elimination therefore becomes much more important in the context of an image that I have already concretized. And well, that's where my academic interest and my understanding of things have helped me. So, it's going hand in hand.
So this is really in more than the sort of the obvious sense. This is really sort of modern, shall we say, contemporary art. What is the commercial value of this?
Well,
how much money are you likely to make on this approach to painting?
Well, you see, I think as long as what I want to do can go on, it's good enough for me. But I would like to jokingly say, you see, 2 decades ago, I painted a toilet, the interior of a toilet, which I called as interior, at National Gallery of Modern Art. In spite of the fact that responded so well to it, said that, but how can you buy a work of that nature? You see, today, at least that acceptability. So I've always indulged with things that have, I mean, I should not say no commercial value, but then very little commercial value.
To start with.
In that sense of the term. But let me tell you, I've survived, and I think I shall. Let's go on like that, just, I
didn't mean from the point of view of making a living. It was actually a question that was leading to another more perhaps significant one, and that was, what is it that art really is? You have national galleries of modern art across the world will present, not just paintings or formal works of art in that sense, but, the latest variation of the Coca-Cola can or cigarette lighter or what have you, and that all reflects a contemporary sensibility.
Yeah.
And so there's a much larger definition of art once you go into the contemporary. How are you going to, in a fairly sort of in a society where there is still a very conservative approach to what constitute art, I think that the community is looking at you now in the position that you are to push those boundaries. So how will you go about? What will be your articulation? What is contemporary art? When does it become art? When does it find a place in the National Gallery?
Well, I have, it's a very interesting question in the sense that I all the time come across people who say, oh, you practice that art that we don't understand. That's the first thing I need to address. There's this great apprehension in the minds of common people to enter National Gallery of Modern Art as opposed to, say, Craft Museum or else National Museum for that matter. I think that's the first thing that I want to break. And I'm going to have all kinds of things to ensure that people from all walks of life come in and be part of it, irrespective of the fact that they don't understand. I must have programs to ensure that their interest is sustained. So although the National Gallery of Modern Art has some art appreciation programs, I think they need to be augmented, and I have some in the pipeline already. Well, I have this very interesting proposal. You see, catch them young, in the sense that why can't we distribute a pack of 50 entry tickets to institutions, to young institutions, ensuring that, well, the best in the field of art in your schools are welcome to come to the National Gallery of Modern Art, but they can only be here along with their parents. So these young ones, I'm sure, going to raise inquisitive questions to their parents, and in turn there are 3 that are addressed, and I shall ensure that this inquisitive nature is answered. So I want to start it from the grassroots levels. There is no reason why we should just, address things.
Well, let me reveal sort of the ignoramus that I really am. Tell me, what is art? How are you going to sort of define an object's worthiness? And I deliberately use the word object because we're looking at something beyond just the frame, which is what we have traditionally associated with art. What gives it value? When does it become art from not being art?
Well, a statement by Dali interests me quite a lot, and I often share it. Dali said, art is what flows from the mind through the hands, through the tip of the brush onto the canvas. So it's this transformation, which I think the common man doesn't quite understand. So you have to actually ensure that he is able to enjoy and come close to the process that it reveals. If this issue can be addressed, then I think several issues can be solved, and that's what I want to do. I mean, it's not about replication, it's not about skill, it's about sense. So we need to address the question of an appropriate sense for an appropriate skill, or an appropriate skill for an appropriate sense, and logically explain to them what is necessary.
Give me some examples of the kinds of well, spaces, canvases, arts, objects that we can now expect to begin to see at the National Gallery of Modern Art that haven't been there thus far.
Well, are you indirectly addressing the issues of installation art by any chance?
Yes, also, yes, absolutely.
Well, I see installations all over in this country. And the whole idea is that, we need to contextualize that and be able to logically share that, what exists in nature, why is it not so, and how does it become so? I think if we are able to do that, so it's a question of not only being able to share the way they need to see things in life, but also contextualize them. Then, and if we can address this in an appropriate fashion.
So what would be, and I'm pushing this because I'm really looking for an example, so what would be an appropriate representation or presentation of this within the boundaries of the National Gallery? And I don't mean physical boundaries.
Did you by any chance see Ravindra Reddy's last show?
No.
Those monumental fiberglass images which are sculptural yet like installations in mighty spaces. So which is close to us. You see, if you show something absolutely alien to the sensibility, it doesn't register, it only shocks. But I want to answer this question with a double-edged sword. Because, time is short and I need to.
Sure.
Yeah.
And in terms of your work as an academic, in what ways have you felt that is now going to be compromised, perhaps, challenged? We started this conversation mentioning the 3 streams of your life, and the administrative one being the most recent.
Yeah.
And beyond the obvious convergence, you're on leave from an academic position. What happens next? You administer the National Gallery of Modern Art. Are you going to find time to paint? Are you going to find time to do other things?
Well, I think my inner commitments are already pushing me to ensure that both these things are addressed. Certainly, there are priorities that need to be addressed with a sense of priority. And right now, administration is so, but I'm very sure that I shall soon begin to have some time for my own inner silence and a reflection of it that I see in my own works or try out in my own works shall continue.
You know, 15, 20 years down the road, when you're old and gray, and may that not happen for a long time, and certainly not old, gray, and bald.
Well, I already started graying, and you're from what I recall you.
And you know, they're talking about Rajeev Lochan, and what would you like to be sort of known as, acknowledged as, applauded as? An artist, an administrator who did a terrific job with the National Gallery? You know, obviously, the ideal thing for you to say is all three, but there must be a yearning somewhere deep in your heart that says, no, I really want to be remembered as an artist, because I believe that somewhere in every artist is an element of history, of creating something tangible that will outlive him, will be a reflection of his own processes to make something ephemeral, concrete, that will endure. So what is it that you would really wish to endure?
Well, I'd like to be remembered as an artist who wanted and could not only administer his art, but art in a much larger context, with mutual admiration and understanding of other people's indulgences rather than his own.
It's interesting that you use the notion indulgences. Do you consider art an indulgence?
Yes, an indulgence for life.